Welcome to Apex Magazine. Strange, surreal, shocking, beautiful. This is the Apex Magazine podcast. I'm your host and producer, Allie Nesbitt. Thanks for being here for this new episode. I am delighted to bring you this month's story by the very talented Renan Bernardo, read for us by Diogo Ramos. Before we get into this month's story, I'd love to share with you what's upcoming from Apex Book Company. Brutal, devastating, dangerous. Join an investigation into a cruel and heartless leader. Crawl through filth and mud to escape biological warfare. Team up with time-traveling soldiers faced with potentially life-altering instructions. Cameron Hurley, an award-winning author and expert into the future of war and resistance movements, has created 18 exhilarating tales giving glimpses into the warfare of tomorrow. A bleak future, yet there is hope for us. With Hurley's characteristic grim optimism, her characters fight for what they believe is right. They exhibit degrees of humanity only possible in the worst of circumstances. These characters, driven by a murky sense of honor and written with sincere, deep empathy, make Future Artifacts Stories a powerful collection you won't soon forget. Find it and our other titles at www.apexbookcompany.com. If you're enjoying what we have to offer on this podcast, we cordially invite you to become an Apex Magazine Patreon supporter. For as little as $2 a month, you'll gain early access to our monthly microfiction themes and an archive of past author interviews and other insights. Visit patreon.com/apexbookcompany for more information. And now, let us turn our attention to this month's story. Apex Magazine proudly presents Episode 95, The Walking Mirror of the Soul by Renan Bernardo.
My desire was written all over Alcian's torso, a shimmering tattoo composed of my thoughts and the Von Kray's crusted skin. Tell Vittorio you know. Luckily, we were alone in Teresa's station's investigation room, so no one could read it. I wasn't easy, palm sweating, tapping my feet on the floor. Normally, I met Von Kray in restaurants, in the sightseeing deck, or in the human Von Kray gatherings and conferences to restate our decade-long commercial and cultural partnership. In those places, their bodies were scrawled with everyone's thoughts in a mess of unidentifiable and overlapping scribbles translated from human minds to Von Kray bodies. Latin, Gujarati, Hangu, Cyrillic, Incipit, Arabic, and dozens of others from the Teresa human population. Mingled with our bulky and confusing thoughts, the Von Kray's own dot-like script were scattered all over their bodies. Words and logograms hopping from body to body. Untraceable, even for those who knew how to read Von Kraysh. But now my mind glared back at me from their body like a damn accusation. It was hard to even follow the Detective 101 tips, like maintaining eye contact and interpreting body language. On the bright side, those things wouldn't really work with Von Kray, or would be hard enough even for me, Isabella Cardoso, Teresa Station's only investigator. I tried to think about something else instead of my fiancée. The case. Think about the damn case you're paid to solve. So that those words were replaced. But they didn't shift. I shook my head and averted my gaze back from their body to my compad, skimming over the case file. Alcian, can you repeat for the record what you saw in the market district? Alcian was my interviewee's chosen Earth name. Each of them picked one for the health of our relationship, as we picked aliases in their language. Repeating, Alcian said, I should be counting my blessings. Less than 4% of the Von Kray had learned any of the Earth's languages, but also knew Portuguese. A male human with a knife stabbed the victim, grabbed an object, ran. I nodded, picking at the picture of the dead man on my compad. His mouth was puckered in revulsion. His eyes popped open in a frightened expression. José Braga, a medical supplies vendor from Lorenzo Station who had recently acquired a stall in Teresa. Seemed like a simple case of robbery with homicide. It had happened in the market district, where the off-station goods flowed in and out. And wherever there was money, there was greed. And where there was greed, there could be bodies. The only witness, Alcian, who was crossing the district at the time to the quarters deck where they spent half of each month. Did you say you were eating caldo verde at the moment? I said, answering, yes. I licked my lips. The environment module of Teresa should be operating at lower levels of humidity, or I was getting nervous with the job, which wasn't common. But hey, my fiancé had plans to move to another station and hadn't even told me about it, so I had the divine right of being mad. Okay, I sighed. I peered into Alcian's eyes as if I could glean anything else from there. Nothing but the usual glint. Having evolved in the Goldilocks zone of their system, in a planet roughly the size of Earth with a similar atmosphere, the Voncray were like humans if you looked at them from a certain angle, but extremely different if you looked from every other angle. They had our humanoid bodies as a distant resemblance, but theirs were rough like a stone and of a flinty periwinkle tonality, like an untouched vein of amethyst. Their eyes ranged from pitch to crystalline waters, their voices from whispers to drumbeats. Alcian was a quiet one who spoke softly and who hardly moved on the chair. If they were a human, I'd say they were extremely shy. Notifications popped on the corner of my pad screen. 2, 5, 7. Work time was work time, but only Vitória sent messages in a row. I tapped on it. Vitória, maravilhosa, can you bring pastel for dinner? Vitória, from Queijo Supremo. Vitória, and some soda. Vitória, and you. Vitória, sorry, many messages. I know you don't like that much. Vitória, just one more. I promise to stop hitting enter. Vitória, I have something to tell you. Asking, can I go? Alcian was staring at me. I blinked at them. To my surprise, the words on their torso had changed. Don't break my heart, please, please. The places were curling around their sides, blurry like smoke. I gasped, all the possibilities of Vitória leaving Teresa churning in my head. I'd proposed to her 6 months ago. We'd planned to purchase a spacious cabin in habitation. And now she was planning to leave and was going to tell me that over soda and cheese pastel. Great, just great. And I still had a murder to solve. All right, Alcian. I stood and turned off the pad screen. That will be all for today. I may have to contact you again. Asserting, you can contact me again. Alcian stood, half a meter taller than me. For now, I had to worry about my yet to come or maybe never will come marriage. And pastel. Ironic how our thoughts flustered back and forth from our friends' bodies, and through them, we found out many things about ourselves. Vitória said they were the walking mirrors of our souls. In a station like Teresa, with half human, half Voncray population, it wasn't rare to find yourself in an elevator with a fellow Voncray only to realize what you really wanted. It had been on the plummy skin of a Voncray that I discovered I wanted to propose. The words, I need to be one with her, glistened on their body when I was strolling in a biosphere garden with Vitória. She chuckled when she saw those words on the body of a passing Voncray, glaring above other, feebler thoughts. I never told her that thought was mine. Also ironic how I found out 6 months later that Vitória was planning to leave me. I unintentionally eavesdropped on her conversation with her boss. She was in the mining business, in a management position coordinating the operations in Ortho. And I knew out here mines depleted and the business moved from place to place as easily as ships transporting goods from Earth. Just didn't think an engagement could deplete as easily. I'd thought of questioning her that day, but decided that should come from her. After leaving Ocean in the investigation room, I shoved the murder back into the corner of my mind and bought us 7 pastéis. 3 cheese, 2 shrimp, 2 veggies. Our right proportion. I set the pastéis over the dinner table in our rented quarters and waited for Victoria to arrive. Handshaking, heart-pounding fast. I knew what was coming, right? Our first serious fight after the engagement. She'd want to go to Vladimir. She'd have been offered an excellent position there, in the corner of the galaxy, in the tiny sulfur-stinking station half a year away from Teresa. I wouldn't be able to go. There was no need for a detective in a place with 100 souls and a 0% crime rate. And there was no way we could cope with that much distance. We'd have to cancel our wedding. We'd have to cancel the plans for our cabin. Hey, maravilhosa, Victoria said when the doors slid open. Joyful enough for someone who had something to tell. I nodded and made a pout just out of habit. She leaned to kiss me, bringing in her scent of soft vanilla with traces of silver ore. I fluttered all over, and for a split moment, I was ready to give up the work I loved to live with her in that ungracious station. She just needed to ask. We could talk, right? We could arrange middle ground for our relationship. It was expensive and tiresome to spend months hopping from station to station, but it was feasible. Vitória took a bath and put on her pajamas. We ate the pastéis, talked about our days. I told her all about Alcion and how I already had investigated a list of suspects but couldn't come to a conclusion. She told me how ortho mines were depleting and how the drillers were just perforating hollow ground. I listened attentively, waiting for the moment when she'd spill out she was going to leave. We had our bellies full, but the moment didn't come. Vicky, I didn't want to be the one bringing up the subject, but I didn't want to read the suspect's files with a part of my day still unsolved. You said you had something to tell me. I skinned her all over, like I did when I was interviewing. She flinched, and I forced a smile. She wore a loose shirt with pictures of ortho and had her locks tied up in a bun. You don't need to look at me like I'm a suspect, maravilhosa. She grinned, but her eyes evaded from me. What I want to tell you is that I found a gorgeous VR rack set for our new cabin. Liar. I almost said it out loud. How I wanted to have a Von Craig standing upright in the room, their naked body flickering with Victoria's real intentions. Why the grumpy face? She said. I rubbed a finger over my brow and shook my head. Just a rough day. I'm used to dealing with black markets, not murders. She stood and set our plates aside on the sink. Her avoidance just made things worse. I thought we could count on each other, share our desires. Maybe it would have to wait. Maybe she wasn't ready to tell me yet. I wasn't okay with that, but I could go on. When we first met the Von Craig 20 years ago, the anthropologists called them telepaths because our thoughts were transmitted to their bodies in ways we didn't grasp. But it wasn't fair to call it telepathy. They weren't consuming our thoughts, reading them, listening to them. They would only know what we were thinking if they read their own bodies or those of their fellows, which they never did, or if they did, never cared enough. What they actually did was expose our thoughts, leave us naked. So the proper term, in my personal unscientific definition unbacked by peers, was that the Von Craig were gymnopaths, from the Greek gymnos, meaning naked, and pathos meaning feeling. It was my day off. I stood with Alcian in silence, gazing at the sightseeing kilometric panel in front of us. I could still see my thoughts distorted on their body through the glass reflection, slowly rippling like waves made up of letters. You proposed to a liar. Luckily, the sightseeing deck with the sun rising over Ortho was packed with people, and among my thoughts was at least another dozen, the fiercest ones in people's minds. I hate this.
Ortho is a gray ball of ugliness, but this bluish sun is the most beautiful thing.
Of course, I thought of that before calling Ocean for a walk. Everyone did when meeting Von Cray, so sightseeing decks, restaurants, and markets were the ideal places. Much was discussed to rethink space station laws after we met the Von Cray. In the end, the wisest decision was to not change anything that would jeopardize the relationship and compartmentalize humans and Von Cray in different categories. What is it like for you? I asked. I'd brought caldo verde for them. Turned out Von Cray loved human food, but Alcian, in particular, told me they were a huge fan of my hometown food, Rio de Janeiro. But I did that so they knew I wasn't there to interrogate them, talk about the murder. Besides, it would be unethical of me to do that. I was there only as a colleague living on the same station, and it was about time I needed to go out with a friend. Keep a healthy distance from Victoria, maybe give her the space she needed to think about her decision. I mean, in your home, how did you feel reading each other's thoughts all the time? Alson sipped from the caldo verde bowl, asking instead of answering, how do you feel not reading each other's thoughts? Sane? I grinned at them. They didn't notice. I mean, there are times I wish I could just speak over someone's thoughts. It would make things so much easier, but still, knowing that anyone could know what I'm thinking, it's creepy. The blue sun completely rose from behind Ortho. The glass dimmed so our eyes wouldn't hurt. I thought of inviting Victoria to come, but that would be cheating, forcing her to walk alongside Alcian so I could try to peek at her thoughts through their body. I still wanted to peek at mine, though, to know what I should do. In a way, being with a Von Cray was like meeting the vidente at the beach back home, talking about the lines of life stamped on our hands like unreliable maps to our futures. Only the vidente in the Von Cray's body was actually your own mind, speaking through stamped words on the bodies of a friend instead of this mass up here in my head. What is the definition of thought for you? I said, for the Von Cray. Answering, this is a concept you introduced to us. But how is this possible? You must have a word for it. Anything, you're conscious beings, you're rational, you assemble ultra-fast sublight engines. What is the word for everything that happens inside your head when you're not voicing these things? Answering, objects. They clinked their knobby nailless finger on the caldo verde bowl. Objects? Like a ball? Alcian nodded. But we can't touch our... Alcian slid a finger over the words leaking from their shoulder to their arm. This doesn't make sense. Okay, you got me there. Asking, what is thought to you, to your kind? Your question makes me think you already know the answer. But here it goes. It's the result, the response of internal procedures within our brains and external stimuli of the world around. Asking, how was this bowl created if it were made by a manufacturer? Alcian leveled the bowl with their eyes. They didn't wait for an answer. Explaining, this bowl would be the response of an idea in your head, which would require the employment of external matter and external actions to be real. I opened my mouth to speak, but I had no words. So thought for you is the final product of a process, like anything else. Alcyon said nothing. Instead, they passed a finger inside the bowl and licked it. What many cognitive psychologists and physicists speculated was that thoughts were made up of matter too, since thoughts are several complex connections fired by our neurons. Therefore, they're energy encoded by ions and molecules that have mass. And this mass, in the form of invisible, still undetected particles, might discharge from our bodies to aggregate on the Von rays. How do they coalesce to form up words in the thinker's language, or abstract lines in the case of a baby's thought? More mystery than finding a murderer. But there was still a huge gap between considering thoughts as matter scientifically and sociologically. I couldn't even begin to imagine humans treating them as objects in our environment. Humans never visited the Von Kray's home planet. Von Kray never visited Earth. It was in our agreement for the time being. All our interactions happened in Ortho, its moons, and the stations across the system. However, some Von Kray had already described aspects of their culture. Their intimate relationships were utilitarian from our point of view. Thought wasn't private. So in a romantic relationship, there wouldn't be lies and secrecy, games of love and seduction, overthinking and daydreams. Or if there were, they functioned in a completely different way than it did for humans. When in multitudes, though, things probably worked differently, as their thoughts became jumbled in a sea of bodies. In that case, they probably behaved more like humans. If thought was like an object, like Alcyon said, then in their view, it was like seeing a car in a very small town. You probably knew who it belonged to, but in a metropolis, it was just another car. Asking, why don't you talk to her? Alcyon was looking at their own reflection on the dimmed glass in front of us. Ortho but a faint gleam compared to my thought, which now had swerved to Alcyon's chest. I think I'm never going to marry her. It's... I clenched my teeth. My compass beeped. I flipped it out of my pocket. Vitória, maravilhosa, you left earlier today. Anyway, I'm bringing Maniçoba. Her tiny face was smiling, her hair falling over her shoulders in curls. The day we took that picture, we'd eaten Ethiopian food in a cozy place and discussed our wedding. We wanted something simple, small, unreligious, but we wanted gorgeous dresses. I folded the compass back into my pocket. Alcyon, I touched their arm. What do you do when you know something you are not supposed to? But I knew they didn't grasp anything regarding the privacy of thoughts. So I rephrased my question. Would you feel bad poking into someone else's thoughts? Asking instead of answering, is this about the murder? I hesitated, then nodded. It was about the murder too. My work was all about acquiring information that I wasn't supposed to know. The only difference was that I often did that with people I had no feelings for, many times with people that did bad things. I didn't tell Alcyon that I was talking about Vitória. Explaining, what we define as thought is part of us, parts we are exchanging with the world around all the time. If a Von Kray wants secrecy, then we must be without others around. I nodded, squinting at the rising sun over Ortho. My thought was plastered over Alcyon's chest, almost a litany of what they had said, lost amidst other people's thinking. We are exchanging parts of us. Vitória brought Maniçoba for dinner, but it wasn't that day she decided to tell me she planned to leave, nor in the next one or the next. A week went by, and each time I caught her eyes in our increasingly quieter nights, her gaze repelled from mine. On the bed, her skin quivered and bristled slightly when I touched her. And each time I thought of her, my chest sank. I should tell her I knew about her plans. We were exchanging parts of ourselves, right? So I decided I was going to come clean with her. And perhaps everything would be fine. It had to be, right? We clasped our hands together when I clumsily slipped a ring on her finger. That day, we cried and made love all night long. We shared our deepest desires and secrets. How could anything with those foundations ever go wrong? There was a way of being 100% sure of Vitoria's intentions without requiring intrusive knowledge of her thoughts. It was pretty simple and has been whirling in my head ever since I talked with Alcian in the sightseeing deck. I called Vladimir Station Mining Hub and asked them if Vitoria was registered in their files. I was an investigator in the system, and though I only had the authorization to act on Teresa, I had clearance on other stations for matters of investigation. And yes, Vitoria was there, registered with Vladimir Station Mining Hub, only waiting for her first day of work. I didn't ask which day it was, though, not because I wasn't curious, but because I was frightened and angry, yes. A hand shaking on the edge of my bed, the other gluing the compad to my ear. If Alcian was there right now, he'd be swarmed with twinkling eyes. Knowing Vitoria was registered in Vladimir wasn't the issue. Knowing she had arranged a first day to start working was what hurt. When Vitoria arrived later that day, I'd managed to resew the tatters of my composure. But she noticed right away there was something wrong. I stood in the middle of the living room with my hands in my pockets. She frowned at me, probably noticing I'd been crying. She was carrying packet food, lentil soup. It smelled of station-simulated wintry days, watching recipe videos together. When will you leave? I asked, abruptly, surprising even myself. And if I wasn't sure before, even with all information I'd gathered, I was now. She opened her mouth and laid the packet dinner on the table. I'm not going to leave. She was harsh, dry, her lips grim lines. I talked with Vladimir Mining Hub. I overheard you the other day saying you had plans to move to Vladimir. Most of all, your eyes have been eluding me. You what? Her mouth hung open. If you overheard anything, why didn't you talk with me straight away? I can ask you the same question. Why not tell me right off the bat? Silence filled the room. We stood like this for what could have been a minute or a year. The lentil soup aroma quickly wilted into the blandness of staring at a gray planet outside the window. I'm not one of your suspects, Vitoria said, voice hoarse in her throat. I hate when you treat me this way. And I'm not one of your oars, I said, anger boiling within me, palms sweating. To be used, then discarded. I felt like a kid coming up with that comparison. And deep down, I hoped to be wrong about her decision. I hoped, wanted to be crazy. Yes, my head is a mess right now, Vitoria said, loosening her hair from the bun and pressing tightly the tie in her hands. I was offered a very prestigious position at Vladimir. All I ever wanted. I crossed my arms and nodded, waiting for her to proceed. It was as if I'd unlocked her mind, not unlike I did many times with criminals in interrogation rooms. I felt a sour taste in my throat. I sat so I stayed at the same level as her. They'd pay me better and I would be doing what I really want to do. Vitoria's eyes were downcast, fixed on the floor. I'd be coordinating all mining operations in that sector of the system and could one day be coordinating all operations in the system itself. That's great, isn't it? She fidgeted with the packed lunch. Of course I accepted it, she said. Wouldn't you? If someone offered you a position as the head investigator of the entire system? Well, don't tell me. I don't want to know. Don't need to know what's deep in your mind unless you want to tell me. I bit my lips and looked slightly down. I kid washed in shame. Victoria didn't remove the laminated paper from the soup. Instead, she picked up a card that was in a plastic envelope right beside it. You know what else would be great? She said. She was crying now. I hadn't seen her crying for a long, long while. And the last tears I'd seen crossing down her cheeks and gently lying on her lips were the tears of joy when I proposed. It would be great to send it all to hell because there are other things that were all I ever wanted. She slipped the card on the table, but I already knew what it was. The key to our cabin. I stood and stepped back, suffocating a shriek of frustration. And you know what isn't great? Victoria said, finally looking back at me. Not trusting each other. I sat on the couch, evading her gaze. The presence of the Vancre among humans was enough for our thoughts to conform and veer into a certain direction. Perhaps with them walking among us, we wouldn't think the things we would if they weren't there. But it didn't matter. They were there and wouldn't cease to be. They had changed the way we viewed our own minds and ourselves, and we probably did the same with them. In fact, we did that all the time among ourselves, subverting and squeezing and molding our thoughts depending on who was around us. Our thoughts were objects, but of a viscous kind, shifting and swishing all the time. I couldn't stay anymore. I had Victoria's thoughts weighing on my mind, a bulky, voluminous mass that didn't belong there. Sorry, I muttered, stood, and left. The three main suspects stared at me in the investigation room. Ralph Molina, Edivaldo Nascimento, and Carolo Gomes. The three had committed other crimes in Teresa before, all related to the market district. The three had been questioned by me before. I didn't care which one committed the crime. I just wanted to rent a capsule bed and induce myself in cryo-nap for about 3 days. I did that sometimes, in pre-Vittoria times, when I wanted to forget everything and wake up later as if from a bad dream. Come on in, I said, opening the door. Also marched in wearing a beige overcoat. This is a friend of mine. Their name is Ocean. All three suspects widened their eyes at Ocean. Ralph frowned, probably deducing what I had in mind. Do you like clothes now? Carolo asked, pinching his lips. The first thing humans tried to do when we established a friendship with the Vancre was to convince them to wear clothes. It wasn't due to any kind of puritanical guideline, but because we were horrified to peek at our thoughts, our privacies, our deepest and most disturbing desires plastered on the rocky purple of their skin. When we realized they wouldn't get dressed to cover our thoughts, we managed to garble their skins by maintaining several human teams with Vancre teams, so we couldn't read the imbricated thoughts of 10 or 20 people at the same time. But also had agreed to wear an overcoat today. It was their way of thanking me for the caldo verde. You have committed crimes here in Teresa, I said to the three men. You have robbed, blackmailed, smuggled goods to other systems, brought illegal stuff from Earth. You made a mess here. Carolina and Edivaldo already served sentences in the Moon Social Educational Complex. Yet, you're always back, always here, still doing nasty stuff. But killing someone? I thought you had at least a code of conduct within your shady businesses. Detective, Ralph said, stooping over the table. If I can... Shut up, I was asked. After our brief struggle last night, Victoria had left for Vladimir. I spent the night in a hangar deck hostel, staring at my ComPad screen, waiting for notifications. eyes dry and awake, the after scent of Victoria's perfume, that protective, cuddly vanilla mixed with that vile, rifted scent of mine's, still teasing my nostrils, pulling me out whenever I dared to doze off. One of you will go from this room straight to the moon, I said in between my teeth. And maybe the others will go as well. I just don't care. Half opened his mouth, but clamped his lips shut when I threw a furious look at him. Austin, I turned to my friend. Please, take off your overcoat. Austin gave me a look as if asking if I was sure. I nodded, but wasn't. They unbuttoned their overcoat. I closed my eyes. It was also the outcome of a process. Our engagement. It required the employment of external matter and actions to become real. In many ways, all I'd been through with Victoria was a thought. From our first meeting, when I was investigating a case of corruption in Teresa Mining Hub, to our first night together, eating pastéis. What else? We were but the slivers of an idea then. Only a year later, we would become a full thought, ripe with interconnected neurons firing up. A rented quarter in the aptation deck, plans for a wedding in a cabin of our own, and memories of how the other talked, moved, smelled, and tasted. A thought I dared to shatter. I turned around and glanced at the three suspects without looking at Austin's body. They were gapping at it, though. You're free to go, I said. My work was to collect evidence. Thought wasn't evidence. I will conclude this investigation at a later moment. I waited for them to leave. Only then I looked at Austin. I only need my own thoughts. The words were tightened along their torso, hardly wavering. Asking, why did you do that? I can't commit the same crime twice. We found out many things about ourselves staring at Von Gray's skin. They were the walking mirrors of our souls. But we found out even more staring straight into another human's body. Gazes and gestures and mannerisms and laughter and the way you slipped a ring into someone else's finger. All thoughts plastered over our own human bodies. All the time, flustering in chaos and confusion, longing to be read and interpreted. Matter all the same. Isabella, I'm sorry for what I've done. It was the only message I sent to Victoria. 5 months after questioning the suspects and 3 months after concluding that Edivaldo Nascimento had murdered José Braga without the need to read someone else's mind. I didn't expect an answer from her. I didn't even expect she was receiving my messages. Perhaps she had me blocked straight away, making of her transference to Vladimir a clean slate. 7 days after the message, I was doing paperwork when notifications popped up in a row in my Compad. And there was only one person who sent messages like this. And one person who made all my body bristle at such a speed. Victoria, my workmate is Von Cray, can you believe? Victoria, and I don't even need to see the words glistening on their body. Victoria, I mean, to know what I want and need right now. Victoria, call me. Let's talk.
Renan Bernardo is a science fiction and fantasy writer from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. His fiction has appeared in Apex Magazine, Podcastle, Escape Pod, Daily Science Fiction, Translunar Travelers Lounge, Solarpunk Magazine, on Spec Magazine, and others. He was one of the authors selected for the 2021 Imagine 2200 Climate Fiction Contest with his story, When It's Time to Harvest. In Brazil, he was a finalist for 2 important SFF awards and published multiple stories. His fiction has also appeared in multiple languages, including German, Italian, Japanese, and Portuguese. Brazilian, born and raised in Rio de Janeiro, Diogo is an English teacher, writer, and the editor-in-chief of Revista e Taverna, which you can find on Twitter at ATAVERNAREVISTA, an online fantasy and science fiction magazine that publishes short stories written by Brazilian authors in Portuguese. He's been teaching for almost 15 years, and once in a while, he dares to translate stories from English to Portuguese. Find him online at diogolsramos.com. Music used in this episode was made by myself, and you can find more of my music at ucthehat.bandcamp.com. The theme music for Apex Magazine podcast was written and produced by Alex White. Now, listeners, do you enjoy the Apex Magazine podcast and would like to see it continue? If so, please consider joining our publisher's Patreon. For as little as $2 a month, you'll receive a subscription to Apex Magazine, exclusive access to our authors and editors, writing workshops, early flash fiction theme reveals, access to our private Discord, and so much more. Head over to patreon.com/Apex Book Company to become an Apex minion today. Thank you all for listening. See you next month.